Today is Monday, March 22nd, and we are at our committee of the whole meeting regarding budget. I'd ask everybody to stand for the pledge, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And to make this meeting official, I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Gutenkopf, absent. Pezza. Here. Shea. Here. Leader, absent. Rose. Here. Graham.
Here.
Pipskin.
Here.
York.
Here.
Nybo, absent. Healy.
Here.
Morley.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Mulliner, absent. Wagner.
Here.
10 present, 4 absent.
10 present, 4 absent. We have an official quorum. And again, tonight is another budget meeting of the whole, and I turn it over to our city manager, Tom Borchert, to open up discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we have now for 2 nights working through the budget of the city for the next fiscal year, and we left off with our historical museum being up next, and we're pleased to present the president of the Elmhurst Heritage Foundation, Tom Klein, is here to present, along with Brian Berghager, the museum visitor and tourism budget. Mr. Klein.
Thanks, Tom. You should have a piece of paper which has 2 pieces or 2 charts on it. Good. So what I wanted to share with you a little bit about the Elmhurst Heritage Foundation, what we've been doing both 2009 as well as what we're planning on in 2010 here. You see in the title there, the idea of historical leadership for 2010, and that has 2 components. One key component clearly is, hey, we're all about history, right, and Elmhurst history, and how do we bring that to life here within Elmhurst. The other is, we're well positioned to help that history come to life financially as well as with a commitment in time over the course of 2010, over and above what's been done in the past. So if you go down to the second chart there, and you see 2009 success, just a short period of time on 2009. There were a couple things I want to call your attention to. One, we had a very successful event in November with over 300 attendees to raise money for the Churchville one-room schoolhouse. We raised over $35,000 at that event. The next is, if you see down there, the gallery receptions, we've gone in, tried to buttress up, make the exhibits that are part of the museum even a bigger component of our outreach. And so we sponsored a couple of receptions here, one around the jazz exhibit last year, as well as the dwellings exhibit that's ongoing right now. This reception happened back in January. So those are a couple of things about 2009. Now, let's talk about where we are right now. We certainly understand the economic situation. Almost all of us are touched in some way with the economic situation that the city is facing, and all of you have to figure out in terms of the budget here. And so we, as the Elmhurst Heritage Foundation, realize that. And what we have done for our bylaws, have temporarily changed those bylaws to go from where previously we were spending our money on extras in order to support the museum and drive forward the goal of bringing history to life here. So that now our bylaws, we can actually work through and create replacement support, operational type support that we had not done in the past. And so that was a long discussion, as you can imagine, within our board to decide whether we wanted to do that. But again, the key reason why we did that is acknowledging the reality that the city, as well as all of us, are seeing out there in the marketplace. So let's go over here to growth plans, because, okay, that's part of it. So what are we doing about it here? Now, the growth plans. So what we've done is we've committed, as you see there, $79,800 to support the Elmhurst Historical Museum over the course of 2010. Now, that's an increase of over 60% from the previous year. And again, showing our commitment and trying to bring this so that the city, we can replace some of the city funds that the city has deemed to bring this museum and keep it going as a very vibrant part of the community. Now, in 2010, we have the Churchville Schoolhouse, and Brian will talk a little bit more about this. After lots of years, we're going to be able to open that here in September through a lot of people's work over the lot of years. And I see some smiles. That's great. And we're very excited that we're going to be able to do that, as well as we put a commitment in, both financially as well as our commitment as our board, as well as we're hoping to get the community to be even more positive, as well as more involved in what we're doing with the Churchville Schoolhouse. The next bullet there you see about development plan. So previously, we were a foundation. Foundations like to raise money. Now we're being much more deliberate about that. And so through a lot of help from the development committee as well as Ken Bartels, we now have a formal development plan to now help us grow both our endowment as well as our ability to spend additional monies. One manifestation of this is our increased commitment here in 2010. If we hadn't raised the money last year, we wouldn't have been able to make that kind of commitment here. And so you see annual gift, annual fund, grants, and sponsorships, all areas that we have not explored as aggressively as we are going to be going forward here. And then lastly here, I mean, why are we doing this? It's not to raise money, right? We're doing this because there's going to be increased value here in the community here around the Elmhurst Historical Museum. And so you'll see this year that there's more exhibits. The exhibits are strengthened also. Hopefully you've seen that when you've gone and seen some of these exhibits over the last year or so. We're going to have increased programming because part of our funding is for a program coordinator. We're going to open the schoolhouse, as I mentioned. And lastly, the schools. They have physical difficulties also. And so we've agreed to go to each of the schools, our board, and say we'll pay for school buses so that they can have their regular field trips to the Elmhurst Historical Foundation. So with that, let me turn it over to Brian and let him tell you a little bit about his thoughts.
Thank you, Tom. I want to thank the board of the Elmhurst Heritage Foundation for all of its work during the past year and express my gratitude for its support of the museum. The board's comprised of very committed people who find time to work on behalf of the Historical Museum in their very busy personal and professional lives. So I truly appreciate the opportunity to work alongside them. These are very difficult economic times for everyone. The museum, like all areas of the city, understands this, and several tactics have been put into place to manage the budget situation. There have been budget reductions at the Historical Museum. 4 staff positions have gone unfilled, and one of those was subject to layoff last summer. 1 staff position, though budgeted, has never been filled. There have been deferrals of expenses, particularly in maintenance and repair costs, and there have been other outright reductions that have taken place. But at the same time, the museum has focused on generating support from non-city sources. Volunteer recruitment was dramatically increased the past year, allowing staff to take on some new roles at the Historical Museum. A grant application was just recently submitted to pay for a large format flatbed scanner that will allow online access to collections in the future, especially to the historic Elmhurst photographs that are part of the collection. Donated and in-kind goods and services, including a digital projector, display panels, printing services, and much more, take place at the Historical Museum. The museum also recently negotiated a lease of exhibit materials from its in-house exhibit last year called The Drawn Out History of Comic Books. The exhibit materials are going to the Gail Borden Library in Elgin, where they will be installed over the summer in exchange for a $1,500 fee. Now, despite the economic time, good things have happened at the museum and for the Heritage Foundation, and I'm happy to report, like Tom, that $79,800 has been budgeted by the foundation for direct support of the Historical Museum. Now, these new outside dollars in some cases will go to replace city dollars that are no longer available, and in other instances, the foundation earmarked dollars to supplement available city funding. I'll review the foundation support in just a moment, but first I'd like to give a brief summary of the museum's performance in the last year as it attempted to build audiences, strengthen the museum and foundation identities, and create greater financial support. Now, the museum is focused on building strong partnerships devoted to its mission and to its core services. For instance, we partnered on exhibits in the past year with Downbeat magazine, which is one of the world's, or probably the world's, leading jazz magazine, and it's published right here in downtown Elmhurst. We partnered with the Elmhurst College Jazz Festival, with the American Academy of Art, a very respected Chicago college that trains artists of all kinds, with the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, with Elmhurst Public Library, and with others. A current exhibit about residential architecture made personal museum connections to more than 24 homeowners in Elmhurst whose homes are showcased in that exhibit. Realtors in particular responded enthusiastically to the exhibit, finding that it helped them market Elmhurst to potential home buyers here in town. And I hope you have a chance to see that exhibit if you haven't seen it already. Our public program partners in the past year included the Illinois Humanities Council, Elmhurst Park District, the Frank Lloyd Wright Home and Studio, York Theater, and others. Just this past week, we partnered with Elmhurst Youth Baseball and Elmhurst Character Counts for successful programs supporting an exhibit called Beyond Baseball, The Life of Roberto Clemente. Museum very shortly will be starting a video history program of televised interviews with Elmhurst residents done in partnership with Comcast. The programs will consist of interviews with people who lived and worked in Elmhurst in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the 80s. We'll document a side of Elmhurst's past that would otherwise be lost as these folks pass away or move out of town. Museum's also focused on building strong partnerships with the press to raise awareness, increase traffic, and to generate support for our programs. Elmhurst Press and Elmhurst Independent served as official media partners on projects in the past year. The Daily Herald assigned reporters to write feature stories about museum exhibits. Time Out Chicago, a weekly guide to all things Chicago, assigned writers to come out to the museum to review exhibits, resulting in exhibits being included not only in the publication's listing of things to do, but also being listed as a featured destination. And I should mention, too, that the museum's on Facebook now. So that's a very short snapshot of the museum's tactics in the past year to build audiences and support. But there will be one new key component to that strategy this year. As Tom mentioned, that component is Churchville One-Room School, the National Register property that's on Church Road. The final phase of renovation and restoration began in late December, and it's moving along on schedule. At this time, we're planning a September grand opening. The schoolhouse will be operated as a historic site, and it'll offer programs for school classes and also the public. We also plan to work with Bensonville Park District on collaborative programs at the site, and teachers and service clubs in Elmhurst have already asked about scheduling the schoolhouse. Now, there are many other ways that the schoolhouse will be used by various components of the Elmhurst community. As an example, the Churchville Cemetery, which is adjacent to the schoolhouse, is operated by a cemetery board comprised primarily of elderly people. The board just recently scheduled a spring cleanup of the cemetery. It's coming up in just a few weeks. And we've arranged for the York High Key Club to partner in the cleanup as a community service project. And granted, this may seem like a small thing, but it's one among many, many ways that the museum and the schoolhouse help make Elmhurst such a special place today and contribute to the social capital of a community like Elmhurst to make it a better place. I'd like to review several of the figures in the 2010-2011 budget, beginning on page 163 of the budget book, if you have that. On line 3062, we have consultant fees. That line contains a $15,000 figure.
Excuse me, Mr. Berhager, what page are you on?
163.
Page 163.
Line 3012.
I'm sorry, okay, I misheard. Got it.
Okay. The $15,000 figure represents a fee for our museum fundraising consultant. And as you may recall, the full-time development director position that was budgeted for the current year was subject to layoff and subsequently was not refilled. The full-time position is not budgeted in the coming year. 1/3 of this $15,000 figure for consulting fees will be paid by dollars from that Heritage Foundation grant. And then 3052 includes professional services for the museum. This line is primarily printing and design services. It includes a school services brochure and some schoolhouse materials, which were actually deferred from last year. It includes the museum's calendar of events, quarterly calendar of events that goes to all households. It includes funds for a newsletter that were deferred from this year that we're in. It also includes press kits, flyers, posters, and banners, things that are used to market the museum and its programs. And then line 5001, building repairs. I wanted to mention that that figure on page 164 includes a deferral from last year, a roof replacement of the education center. It's another one of those items that we've deferred actually now a couple of years, and we're at the point where the work absolutely needs to be done because of the threat of even more damage. And then line 6030 is the Heritage Foundation support for the museum this year. The $35,000 figure.
I don't see 6030.
No.
6039.
6039. Thank you.
6039, I'm sorry, yes.
That's okay.
6039. And you'll see the 2010-2011 projected figure is $35,000. That is an old figure. As Tom mentioned, the board met just a couple weeks ago to deliberate the final level of its support for 2010 and approved that figure of $79,800. Now, $5,000 of that $79,800 is included in the 3012 line, which is the consultant line, which I mentioned just a moment ago. So the figure in 6039 will be changed in the final budget to $74,800. And there'll also be a corresponding change made on the revenue side of the budget to show that increase. As Tom mentioned, the foundation funds are earmarked in several areas of the found. Do you have questions on that?
I'm not sure I followed your accounting on that one, Brian.
All right. The total grant.
It's the $35,000. That line item's going up to 79 or 74,800.
Yes, 74,800.
But there's going to be a balance of the exact same amount in the revenue. So it's budget neutral versus $35,000 heavy. Am I reading that? Is that what I'm hearing?
$35,000 is eliminated. Will be replaced by $74,800.
Right.
And that $74,800 will also be added to the $5,000
Sure.
to make a total of $79,800.
It sounds to me like a net savings to the city if you're getting funding elsewhere. I understand you're putting in the budget because you're sure you're going to spend it, but it sounds to me like the city will actually not be funding that money, and therefore it's, as it relates to this budget I'm looking at, it's a $35,000 savings. Is that what I'm hearing?
No. If I may, this is the spending area. This grant line, 6039, has always been the foundation gift to the city as it's spent. there's a revenue side that matches this.
Oh, so there already was a $35,000 revenue. This is just an increase.
It's an increase.
I got you.
279.8 in total revenue, as Brian has explained.
But the,
Can you, I'm sorry, Alderman Morley, if I could jump in, and this was going to be one of my questions. On page 91, 92 is the revenue side of it. If you can speak to those line items that would be adjusted to reflect on what we're saying from the expenditure side, I think everybody would be clear. Because I think there's 4 or 5 line items in the revenue side, and if you can speak to which one of those expanded, then it would be clear and offset each other.
Sure. It's on page 92, about 2/3 of the way down, under other income. And the account numbers, last 4 digits are 14-00, Museum Foundation donation.
And that changes to
79,800.
from the 40,000. From the 40,000.
Yes. Yes, from the 40,000. And not to confuse matters, but that 40,000 was computed with the 35,000 that's shown on the expense side and the 5,000 on the expense side in the consultant line.
Makes sense. Very good.
I'll take just a moment to explain the expenses for those funds. As Tom mentioned, the funds will replace what had been a full-time public programming staff position at the Historical Museum. That will be replaced with a part-time contract position. The full-time position has been empty and frozen for more than a year. This is a position that's extremely important at the Historical Museum, responsible for all public programs at the Historical Museum. It also includes more than $18,000 for actual costs of renovation and restoration of the schoolhouse. It also includes $9,000 for program and event expenses associated with the opening of the schoolhouse. And then the exhibit program at the Historical Museum will be supported with $10,000 as well. And I would like to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about the exhibit program in the coming year so you can understand the use of those dollars. The museum has some exciting exhibits planned, including a summer exhibit about the history of magic with special breakout sections about legendary Chicago magicians, particularly a gentleman named Marshall Brodeen, who played Wizzo, the magician on the long-running Bozo show. Those of you who grew up in Chicago may have known Wizzo. Mr. Brodeen lives in the western suburbs, and he and others like him are working very closely with the museum on this exhibit. The exhibit will appeal to adults as well as to kids, and its appeal will extend beyond the city limits, attracting day visitors to Elmhurst from the greater Chicago area, not unlike the Elmhurst Jazz exhibit that was up about a year ago. And we do have a promotional board over there about the Magical History Tour opening this summer. Later in the year, we'll open an exhibit about the history of city services. Now, this will be a great opportunity to share the breadth and the depth of services that residents in Elmhurst have come to depend on today. And it will also, I think, build respect for the work that's been invested by the city to make Elmhurst a better place over time. Now, each of these exhibits will include interactives and media components that museum visitors have come to expect in most history exhibits these days. And then a traveling exhibit from the George Eastman House consisting of Civil War photographs has already been booked for 2011, when there will be an Elmhurst-wide commemoration of the beginning of the Civil War. So the museum's participation in this community-wide commemoration will be this traveling exhibit of noted photographs that are in the collection of the George Eastman House. The remaining $4,500 in that grant from the foundation is split among school services and other public programs. So as I said earlier, these are very tough economic times, but the museum is fortunate to have the Heritage Foundation step up to provide a bridge at this time. And despite the tough economy, the museum, along with the foundation, realizes that opportunities are also at hand. So we look forward to serving residents of Elmhurst during the coming year and finding more of those opportunities to take advantage of. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions, anybody? Alderman Brown?
Thank you. Excuse me. I want to thank you both, Tom and Brian, for coming out. I've asked some of these questions in the past, and I think they're more critical as we continue to have trying economic times. One of my questions was already answered by Alderman Morley's previous question in regards to the revenue. I do want to say that it is good to see that we are betting, per se, that the foundation will be able to come through with extra dollars because that will enable the Historical Museum to continue on to do additional programs. My concern, and it's just one general question, is that if I look at the summary of the expenditures for the Historical Museum on page 165, and if I'm reading that right, and I do understand that there are some capital costs included here, I think the line item is where it states Historical Museum of a total projected for 10-11 of $870,250. If I look at the previous years when times were, well, it could be debated a little bit better, in 07-08, our total actual cost was $643,944. Now, I do understand that there's the addition of the grant being higher from probably $30,000 at that time to $79,000, so there is a part of that difference. But my concern is that even though, and I'm not, in case there's any press out there, I'm not saying that I want to shut down the Historical Museum, but my concern is that back in 07-08, we were spending $643, close to $644, and in still hard economic times, we're approximately $230,000 over what the expenditures were back then. My general question, finally, to get to the point is, what are we doing in addition, or why are these a necessity for the Historical Museum in these trying times? That additional $240,000 or $230,000.
Brian, while you're thinking about that, I just want to interject that last year's budget was 1.3 million, and so last year's budget we are down almost $500,000 to 870. So yeah, if you do go back to 07-08, the overall budget was 650, but we are dropping those numbers considerably by outsourcing and using contract staff. But I will let you finish answering it. But I wanted to just paint the whole picture for the people that are watching out there, because if you look way back, yeah, those numbers are less. But if you're looking at last year, we're considerably cutting that. And I think most of that is the capital that we're deciding not to use in the budget, because we're going to be putting off the rebuild of a museum for quite some time until this economy does get back. But I'll let Brian finish up on that.
Sure, those capital dollars have been taken out of the budget, but to address some of the figures that you see for the actual budget in 07-08 and the actual budget in 08-09, those are the actual dollars that were spent. They don't reflect what was budgeted. So, for instance, there were reductions taking place in our budget during those years. And for instance, in 08-09, the budgeted full-time salary line was $311,000, and it was back down to $255,000 that was actually spent. And you can see our projected full-time salaries this coming year, 2010, are below that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the actual figures that are shown in '07 through '09 consist of a number of both reductions as well as deferrals that have taken place. So I haven't prepared specific figures for how those differ from the 2010-2011 budget. I'd be happy to get that information.
Yeah, I guess let me, instead of a general question, I'll try to zero in on an example to help out in this conversation. In regards to a couple things, I guess, what was budgeted or estimated for this past year, the reason why it was approximately 1.3 was due to the capital improvements for the Churchville Schoolhouse, et cetera. In the specifically, I'm trying to think of a quick example. You did mention in regards to 07, 08, what was budgeted and these are actual. What I'm trying to get at is in 07, 08, if we were able to operate the museum at a certain cost, which is approximately $230,000 less than what's proposed in this budget, in these trying times, why couldn't we operate, and that's what the actuals represent, is the actual operating cost. Why couldn't we operate at those same costs a couple years later? In those times, in 07, 08, line item on page 163, consultant services 3012, the staffing cost was less, but we didn't have consultants at that time. Now what's proposed, we're saying the staffing cost is more, as well as having consultant costs. So that's just one example of, is the consultant cost a necessity? Is, I don't know, some of the processing a necessity? Is some of the seminars a necessity? Because that's another line item, 6011, albeit minimal, only $1,000 increase, but it's still an increase in trying times.
Well, for instance, the conference seminars and training represents a decrease from the 09-10 budget. It is greater than the estimated 09-10 budget shake out at. That is the type of thing that we've severely cut back on this year, and I would like to be able to provide additional training and conferences at that level that was budgeted of 2,500, if it's possible, because there were severe cuts this year. We really towed the line this year. The budget also for 2010-2011 includes the $35,000 figure for the foundation grant. That was not included in past budgets.
Agreed.
So there's an increase in the total amount due to that $35,000, for instance. Let's see, just going to the summaries, the salaries and wages, the estimated 09-10 total would be $382,000. Our projected for 2010 is $351,000. There's a decrease there. The next section, employee benefits, goes from an estimated year end of $131,000 to $143,000. That's something that we don't control at the Historical Museum. Perhaps HR or Mr. Borchert could address those costs. Contractual services go up from $51,000 to $64,000, and again, as you noted, the bulk of that is the $15,000 for the consultant fee on line 3012. The commodities show a $2,000 increase over our estimated. Our estimated of $10,500 may come in higher than $10,500. Again, that's another area where we've really towed the line this year and have tried to cut back. But office supplies and materials
Okay.
continue to go up.
So I take the point that there's nothing that, taking a look at what is currently listed, there's no way we can trim it any further, is the summary. I don't want to go line item by line item, but I was just looking at the totals from a couple of years ago, the actuals, granted, but the way I look at it was, if the museum was able to operate on those actuals 2 years ago, why wouldn't they be able to sustain operating on those same actuals 2 years later in these type of economic times? And that was the only point that I was trying to get at. So I appreciate your comment, so thank you very much.
If I could just make a follow-up.
Mr. Berghair? Sure.
Okay. Mhm.
Your microphone isn't...
All the city departments had to go through a number of iterations with the budget committee, city manager and the budget committee, to reduce expenditures to the target of being balanced to the anticipated revenues. It's a thin balance, which we've already talked about, but all of the areas of service have been identified as important and needed and necessary. We're focusing certainly on core critical as a priority, necessary infrastructure next, and then the other areas all contribute significantly to the quality of life of the community. Want to keep them all alive to come back to their heyday at another day, ideally, at least with the recession ending and the other revenues returning to the city. Museum budget is down to 3 full-time people. 3 full-time people. Mr. Berghager, Lance, who does the event,
Exhibits.
Exhibit planning, and doing a fantastic job with Brian's leadership and the board's oversight, creating really a higher level of interest in the broader community with a higher quality of exhibits. And Nancy, who runs all of the archiving and the access of the community that comes to research information. Since a couple of years ago now, the one-room schoolhouse is going to be programmed to be up and operating. So there is a need to staff that while maintaining the other previous areas of service for the community. So this is really about where it needs to be to keep it alive, to then come back and thrive a little bit later, which would be, I think, an appropriate investment by the Elmhurst community, in that there are returns, as Mr. Klein has identified. I believe, and it's now being quantified, that this quality of service for the community does provide a return in the overall value of the community and its real estate values, as well as its ability to provide education, as School District 205 provides an education for the community. So, but I think this is about where it needs to be to go forward, going forward, and we have balanced the budget with your collective help in the other areas of expenditure reduction and revenue enhancement.
I'd also mention that, as the city manager has said on a number of occasions, the budget is the fence of spending, and all departments are instructed to stay within that fence and not go to that fence if it's not necessary. And that's been the case for the Historical Museum in the past year. We've pulled back from the budget as we found opportunity over the course of the year, and the entire budgeted amount has not on every occasion been expended. Hopefully that will continue in the coming year, but the fence is set for us.
Very good. And one thing I got confused on was the one room, and actually the dollars that I mentioned that were different were actually dollars that we spent on the one room, which was, by the way, grant money that we received from the state that was earmarked for that project. So we utilized those grant dollars to our fullest ability. And I believe it's the only one-room schoolhouse on its original site in the state of Illinois, from what I understand. Is that correct, Mr. Berghager?
It's not the only one on its original site, one of the very few, but
Okay.
one of the only, I think the only one in the Chicago area on its original site.
And we do want to make sure we open that so that we can use it and enjoy it and have access to it. So I think that in the budget is good, and it looks like you guys are watching the pennies, which is important right now, as Alderman Brown alluded to. You know, Alderman Healy wanted to interject something. Alderman Healy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I'd just like to make a point, and then I've got two questions. The first point that I'd like to make is, from my perspective, I think the levy that we passed made this conversation a little bit easier. Had we not passed that levy, I think the cuts that would have had to have been made to the whole city budget, but to this budget in particular, would have been fairly drastic, at least in my opinion. First question, I'm a little fuzzy on it, so I want to make sure I understand the incremental dollars that the foundation is ponying up. 5,000 is going towards consultant fees, leaving about 74,000 that falls under the EHMF endowment line. How will that money, that 74,000, be spent? Will it be spent to offset salaries, or did I hear you correctly that it's going to be paying for different programs in little chunks? Can you just make sure? I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Sure. There are a variety of expenditures that will be met with those funds. And just a moment.
As you look at his notes, it's 5,000 for the development consultant, which is 1/3 of that rate. And
So that's the 5,000 that's in line 3012.
correct.
The incremental 5,000. So that leaves a $74,000 approximate balance.
And then fees for the part-time contract public program employee, 100% of that.
Yes, and that's replacing what had been a full-time city-funded position.
Okay.
And that includes also $18,500 for actual costs of renovation and restoration of the schoolhouse. In order to finish that project, over $18,000, in addition to the state grants that Mayor DeCiani mentioned earlier, was required. So the foundation has guaranteed those dollars to finish the renovation and restoration. And then $9,000 for program and event expenses associated with the operation of the schoolhouse. And then,
So those are anticipated to be new expenses, since that building isn't operational yet. So
that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And then also $10,000 directed to the exhibit program at the Historical Museum. And those dollars will supplement other city dollars that are in the budget on line 6044.
Okay.
And that will allow the exhibits to become significantly more elaborate in terms of some of the media components that are used, that type of thing.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. Now my bigger question, and it's already been discussed a little bit, but it's really where I'm coming from in relation to the museum's budget. When I look at this year's estimated expenditures of $1.239 million, 10-11 budget of $870,000, it's been clarified that most of that was in capital expenditure for the one-room schoolhouse. If when I did the math, I equalized the spending. So I equalized the estimated spending from this year to the projected $38,000 for next year in capital expenditure. That difference was $448,000 that I'm guessing for the most part was attributable to the one-room schoolhouse. Mm-hmm. But when I look at, if I equalize that in terms of spending and budget, this year's budget's approximately $79,000 over last year's spending. Some of that you're telling me is going to be offset by the foundation's incremental dollars. Doesn't sound like it's going to be offset one-to-one, but the budget is still, once you equalize for the one-room schoolhouse, is still over this year's expense. I'm not comfortable with that. And I understand it's offensive, it's your fence. I personally feel that fence is too high out or too far out there given the situation we're in. Some of the other cuts that we've had to make in other departments have been fairly severe, and I think most of us would agree to that. I don't know that the expense reduction on the Historical Museum budget is to that same level. And I didn't even, quite honestly, to Alderman Bram's point, I didn't go back and look at 07, 08 actual expense when Alderman Bram mentioned that. That was an eye-opener for me because I didn't go that far back. Given the situation we're in, I personally don't feel that the cuts, and I understand the cuts have been made and there's one less the full-time position, I don't know that that's severe enough, given the situation we're in. And in terms of the overall budget, I'm not real comfortable that the overall revenue projections are going to flow through. And if that's the case, we've got to find that money somewhere. And with that in mind, I'm suggesting that the Historical Museum, I don't want to say it's getting off easy because they're not getting off easy, but I don't know that they're getting off as hard as some of the other departments. Not to suggest that the work of the museum isn't good work, it is. Not to suggest that I want to see those doors closed, because clearly I don't. I just don't know that the pain is there like it is in some other places. And the one example in my head that I keep going back to is the community service officers. We have to pull police officers out of the high school, community service officers out of the high school. That to me is pretty severe. I don't see that same equation on the Historical Museum. That's where I stand, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you, I certainly don't want to go line by line to say, well, you could do this. That's not my job. I'm not an expert. But when I look at the fence of $870,000, I think that's a little far out there, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Alderman Healy. Before I go to Alderman, I know Alderman Shea and Alderman Wagner have their hand up. One thing too, Brian, this will be the one-room schoolhouse is an additional building we're putting on, so that's going to, we've got a little bit more of an increase in budget to allow for that. We put a lot of money into that. We've got Bensenville's cooperation. They put money into it. This will also be a revenue maker for the museum, won't it be? Brian, can you elaborate on that a little bit, how you're going to charge and projected revenues there? Because that's something we haven't really seen yet as far as actual dollars coming in, but being that this will be a revenue maker, a tourism builder for our community, one of two in the state. If you could talk about that a little bit, that would be great. And then I'll go to the other Alderman real quick.
Sure. It will provide some revenue for the city. It will be developed as a destination for area-wide school field trips with a fee for schools. Elmhurst schools are in partnership with the city on the schoolhouse because the school was deeded to the city by District 205 back in 2001. And so Elmhurst schools will not face a fee for the school's use. Bensenville has provided water service or water hookup to the building, and the value of that water service will be spent down by Bensenville schools or at the direction of the village of Bensenville. After that point, the village of Bensenville or Bensenville schools would also face the same fee that other schools have.
Very good, thank you. And I would agree with Alderman Healy, if the choice was a police liaison at York versus something different that would be maybe less life safety, I agree totally. I think the issue there is we're looking to put another police officer on the street, and I have a concern about that myself personally. I think we have adequate numbers on the street. We need more in the schools, but naturally, if we're comparing both, there's no question, I think, which way we'd go. So I do agree with you there. Alderman Shea, I'll go to Alderman Wagner.
Hi. Just in defense of the Historical Museum's budget here, if we're going to start comparing 07 and 08 with now, most of it that I've found is kind of unavoidable. Employee benefits, the health insurance, dental insurance, all that stuff, that's gone up. That's something that we just can't help, and that accounts for $50,000 of it. With that, and if you're going to count the pay Of course, the salaries have gone up, even if we've eliminated a position, it's gone up over those years between '08 and now, and that accounts for like 66,000. Plus the deferrals, the roof has to be done, adding the consultant on there, and if you add it all up, it's, you're only like $50,000 off of the difference between '07 and '08 and now. So I think really, I just wanted to defend their budget a little bit, because I think they did a nice job with what money they have.
Thanks, Alderman Shea. Alderman Wagner, you have a hand up?
Yeah, Brian, real quick. I think this might be an easy one for you. I'm just looking for the employee amounts in both the full-time and part-time. What are those counts?
We have 3 full-time.
So that, I'm sorry to interrupt. We'll take it one at a time. So that 244,000 is for all 3 of you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, there's no placard in there for a frozen, pardon the expression.
Position?
But position, thank you.
No, there isn't.
Okay.
That's
And on the part-time side then?
I'm sorry?
On the part-time side?
On the part-time, we have, just a moment. We have 5 part-time.
And that's a total of 105, right, and the 5? And the 5 employees, it's a total of 105,000 on the line item
Yes.
there? Okay,
Okay, there's no placard in there as well?
right.
That's correct.
That's all I needed. Thanks, Brian.
Brian, what was the savings with the previous developmental director as far as what he was making versus our current contract, just out of curiosity? I recall somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80,000 plus benefits and pension, and we're
Yes, in
allocating
that
around
range.
15. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
very good.
Quick question.
Alderman Healy.
Where would that be reflected in the budget? Because I don't see a correlation, you know, if we dropped 70 to 80,000 in salary, I'm not seeing a drop 78,000 any line item.
You do between '09, '10 budgeted and estimated.
He was only on for 1 year, Alderman Healy.
Okay,
so
but I'm looking at the '09-10 estimated and then the budgeted of next year, 10-11. I mean, if we spent it, or at least we spent part of it.
That's right.
How long was he with us?
It was vacated in August of last year.
It was about 8
you mean
months.
they changed pretty quick?
Okay, but from a fiscal standpoint, that covers the fiscal year, right?
Would have been 4 months.
So we got rid of him after
1/3.
4 months.
1/3 of the fiscal year should have been reduced, yes.
Okay. So the approximate savings is not 70, 80,000 per se. It's because we let him go after 4 months. It's 25,000 approximately.
It's
From actual dollars
2/3.
spent to dollars budgeted, it's about 25,000. Okay.
Very good. Alderman Morley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Burhager, I'm sure you're familiar with the task force. You were taken to task pretty well on this as it relates to your group. On page 20, I don't know if you have a copy of it, but I'm wondering if this is still accurate, and you can take a look at this if you need to. The recommendation out of the task force was $336,000 in cuts coming out of the Historical Museum. Primarily, and I'll read these, and I'd like to get your input on this. Eliminate full-time educational services position, according to the task force, that's not currently filled. Eliminate part-time reference and collections assistant, not currently filled. Eliminate full-time community coordinator programs position, not currently filled. Eliminate full-time development director, we just discussed that, recently eliminated. Eliminate part-time and interns, 3 positions, not currently filled. I can give this to you if you want, but do you know if what of that you followed and what you haven't followed?
We know in summary that we've achieved over $286,000 in cuts.
Where do you see that, Tom? Is that in our budget, or is that?
A little bit different way. The general fund budget reductions, on page 401 and 402 of the cuts. And then there was a request to summarize that, provided that summary in the handout. Provide a summary of those cuts. We submitted these cuts were a little bit different, but they came pretty close to that amount of cuts.
Tom, where are we on that?
There's a sheet on the dais.
Oh.
Keeps going off. It's subjective as to what's appropriate expenditure and what's the best way to do the revenues. Again, we've attempted to provide for the council to consider a budget that maintains core critical, essential infrastructure and the other areas that provide a quality of life. We believe, I believe, and many of you, most of you, if not all of you, believe that the museum provides a significant quality of life add for the Elmhurst community. It's significantly reduced this year. Keep it at its limited level, but with the addition of the one-room schoolhouse, with a significant input from the Heritage Board to provide additional revenues in a couple of different areas of emphasis, with additional emphasis in volunteers and docents to help support the operation, because they believe, as we all believe, the museum provides positives for the Elmhurst community. Could it be cut more? Absolutely could be cut more. Everything could be cut more. But as we cut more, we're into areas of value and beginning to adversely affect. I think for going forward, what has been a successful tactic by the councils and the staff together going forward, if there's an area where there's not quite a consensus that the budget is reasonable, appropriate, we should go forward, we'll circle the area, continue on in our review of the budget by department, take a final look at revenues, do a recap, and then go back as necessary for the council to be satisfied with the chair's leadership.
Alderman Moore, you have a follow-up, and then I'll go to
Follow up on
Alderman
that.
Rose.
Well, I actually am, it's interesting to hear you say that, City Manager Borchert. Short of someone up here directing a reduction is what you're saying, is that you can go back and consider. I think, and don't get me wrong, I mean, it seems like we have this budget conversation with relates to the Historical Museum, and all of us have to qualify it first by saying how much we love it. Well, I think that goes without saying. I mean, we wouldn't have one if we didn't want it. We're just talking about tough economic times. And if I look at this handout that Marilyn provided, it shows 286, if I'm reading this correct, $286,000 reduction out of the Historical Museum. Am I reading that correct, Mr. Borchert? Okay. If I'm reading that correct, then it begs the question what Alderman Healy brought up before. And I'm not directing any cuts. It just begs the question. If I remove the capital out of the budget and the estimated for 09-010, I don't see $286,000 when compared to any of the previous 4 years. Now, if they're positions that were vacant and have been vacant for a couple of years, that's where they are. I get it, but Alderman Healy pointed it out. We voted for a levy increase. It was a very difficult vote to do, and we asked the citizens of Elmhurst to dig a little deeper. On the heels of that, we all said that we are going to squeeze every penny. So if I take out the capital and I take out the endowment, I do see an increase. And we get caught in this every year we go over the budget. We are less than halfway through the budget. Are we supposed to be talking about cuts here? What cuts here are better than other cuts there? So I share concerns that Alderman Healy has. I don't profess to be an expert on the museum, and I appreciate Brian's hard work. So I'd be interested to see what you have to say, City Manager Borchert, maybe down the road.
Before I go to Alderman Rose, I just want to interject too. The task force, in defense of the task force, they didn't know we had this grant for the state grant of $400,000, which we were going to go ahead and move ahead on. So I don't know if they necessarily allowed for operating expenses for the one room in their list of cuts, et cetera. So similar to, they didn't see what sales tax was going to do for the next few months, and we were making those decisions up here as to how we're going to work with those issues. But so in fairness to the task force, a lot of these things that we approved after they made their recommendations, and I don't know if they allowed for those operating costs. So defending them, but also defending, I think, a good establishment that we need to open and utilize and will bring in revenue is a good thing as well. I'll go to Alderman Rose. And
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to thank Marilyn Gaston, Director of Finance, for preparing this in a way that's a little different. It makes some sense to me. I guess I would respectfully disagree with Alderman Healy and Alderman Morley about that, most especially Alderman Healy, in saying, where's the pain here? I look at this, and it appears to me the Historical Museum is taking, percentage-wise, a bigger cut actually than any other department here outside of visitor and tourism, which is fairly small, and planning and zoning, and that's primarily related to the number of folks who were laid off. So I see the pain. I will tell you, I do see it here. I think police officers in school versus this, I think that those are the judgments. That's why we have a professional staff to make those judgments, and I respect what they're saying here. But I think we are really asking the Historical Museum, really cutting their budget a quarter of what it was budgeted the previous year. I would put this against, just so we kind of get a sense of perspective, in the total budget we're talking about $41 million approximately. The police department is getting $15 million, fire is getting $9 million, finance is $3.3 million, public works $18.6 million. This still is a public works town. And so that I think that a budget that's gone down to less than $1 million for the museum it's certainly not optimum, but it seems painful to me. And I think as we remove these three positions, a lot of these positions, those are the very kinds of cuts that, in the end, really can cripple an organization. So I guess I don't agree with the statement that the museum is not sharing the pain to the level of other departments. It appears to me that they surely are, and in fact, maybe sharing more of that pain.
thanks, Alderman Rose. Anybody else? Alderman Pezza?
Oh, thank you. I have several comments and then also some questions. I first would like to start by thanking, I see many of the foundation members. Thank you so much. I am very impressed at the work you have done and the amount of funds you have been able to raise, especially in these times. And I think it shows that there is community love and support and need and want for our museum and our heritage. I think that speaks volumes. So thank you. And I wish you continued success, and I hope you can double that amount next year. And as Elmhurst evolves, I think we need to understand, we talk about how we want Elmhurst to continue to evolve and develop and change. And as that happens and we attract new residents and new business, the key component that the new residents and new businesses have, the one key component is our history. And for some people who don't even know Elmhurst, but came here because they fell in love with the community as they were looking to buy a home or start a business, that's the one thing we all can share and have in common is the history of the community. So I think in that regard alone, it's a very important component for this community. You know, you talk about marketing. We had a big discussion last Monday about marketing. And when I listened to Brian speak, I think the museum alone is marketing this community and we don't even realize. Brian spoke as to all the magazines and features, and I mean, I think we have to consider that as marketing, because not only does it attract people to the museum, but it brings an awareness of Elmhurst in general and the community and the business, and as you said, for real estate values. People love this town because we have our own character and because we have history and because we have architecture and such a great mixture of culture and education and all those components. So I think we have to stop looking at the museum as its own entity. I mean, the museum is a piece of Elmhurst, a piece of the community. And, you know, that being said, yes, I agree, these are tough times. Therefore, I have a couple of questions regarding the revenue end. I'm wondering if we've explored, and I'm sure you have, but every possible way to raise revenue. One thing I thought of is, have you ever considered renting out the annex, for meetings? I know I've tried to get the library. Most of the time it's rented out. People are always looking for places to rent rooms. Is that something you could explore and charge a fee and rent it for meetings to get some revenue? Any other ways to increase the revenue? What have we done for that?
Well, with respect to the rental of space, we have looked at it, and at this point we're not pursuing it. You know, most meetings take place in the evening. It would require staff. It requires staff to set up and take down chairs and tables. We actually rely on building maintenance employees to do a lot of the setups at the Historical Museum, and there's just a limited amount of time that they're able to spend on that as it is right now. The other aspect of that is that we don't have the best facility for rentals in terms of washrooms or refreshment preparation, that type of thing in the education center. It's certainly something that we're looking at. We have endeavored to make personal invitations to service clubs and organizations to hold one of their regular meetings at the Historical Museum, couple that with a tour of the exhibit, and actually in the past year, in 2 or more instances, the result of that has been financial support from the service club or organization. So we'll continue to do that this year, and the schoolhouse is another opportunity for that type of thing. Again, the schoolhouse doesn't have a kitchen area or any type of food preparation area.
Another question. What are the hours the museum is actually open? Could you run through those just quickly?
Sure. The public gallery hours are 1 to 5 every day except Monday, so the public can walk in and enjoy the exhibit during those hours. And it's also staffed 8 to 5 Monday through Friday by what we call the regular staff. So we respond to telephone calls, inquiries. We do school groups at that time. We make special arrangements for individuals doing research to come in during those non-public gallery times. So really, we could say 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, 1 to 5 on Saturday and Sunday.
That being said, I mean, I do believe if we're looking at keeping this size budget, I actually would like to see the hours expand. Sometimes I think people, maybe one evening a week, it would be nice. I mean, the goal here is if we're going to spend the money on the museum and we're going to advertise, I think it would be nice to be open more hours, make it more opportune times for people. Somebody that works all week might want to come and see the baseball exhibit one evening, or maybe on a Sunday for a couple of hours. I mean, I think this is a generous budget, And I would like to see on the opposite end of that, the hours expanded to accommodate more residents. Is that something you've looked at?
We've looked specifically at evening hours. I know Elmhurst Art Museum has one evening when they're open. We haven't taken the step to expand to evening hours at this point. We've done specifically some evening programs to attract that very audience that you're talking about, individuals who are working during the day. Oftentimes we have gallery receptions or, for instance, last week we had a speaker come in the evening, and the galleries were also open. So that's what we're looking at this point in terms of evening hours, some special events. We also partnered with a city center group last summer when there was a promotion for different types of arts in the city center area. I think it was 1 or 2 nights, and we were open during those hours. So we try to partner with other groups when there's an opportunity to do that type of thing.
And then just a final for Tom Klein, I have a question. Sure. Regarding the foundation. I believe when we spoke, you mentioned that the foundation has goals. Do you have dollar amounts set for future years of goal, what to raise to fund perhaps more of that budget?
Yeah, actually, one of the big discussions at our last meeting in order to make this additional commitment was, okay, we don't want to hit our endowment because people gave money to the Elmhurst Heritage Foundation specifically for the endowment. So, yeah, we could go spend money on the endowment, but that's not what people are doing. So the discussion then across the board, and everyone agreed to this, was that, okay, if we're going to spend this additional amount, we need to be able to raise this additional amount during the year of 2010, fully realizing how difficult it's going to be. And everyone stepped up and said, yes, let's do that. Now, longer term, where do we want this to go? We're going to have to see exactly how do we want this. We want it to be larger, clearly, at some point in time. We also want to be able to do more with Elmhurst history and bring this forward. So that's going to evolve as we go along here.
Okay, thanks.
Very good.
If I
Brian, do you want to add to that real quick?
could add one comment to that. The development plan for the foundation includes a number of revenue streams or streams of support, ways of giving and supporting the foundation. It includes an annual fund, and clearly we'll be attempting to expand that base of annual fund donors in the coming years. Because annual fund donors, after a number of years, oftentimes become sponsors, become the sources for bequests or large gifts for an organization. So we're starting with that base. We're also looking at sponsorships and some other grants. Anecdotally, last year there was a bequest to the foundation, and just about 2 weeks ago we got a call from another attorney with a bequest, so we're working with an attorney on a bequest. A few weeks ago we had a $1,000 gift from a first-time donor. These are all good things that are happening at the foundation, and a lot of those you can't plan for a $1,000 first-time donor, but they begin to happen and they grow and make better things happen over time. So we've got a great start, I think.
Very good, very good. Alderman Kennedy had his hand up, and I'll go to Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to first say thanks to Tom and Brian. I know you guys work very hard in this area. A little bit about the one-room schoolhouse. Do you guys have a business plan in terms of what you're looking from a revenue standpoint? Have you started recruiting? You know, what do you see this going in? Is it ultimately going to be self-sufficient from a cost standpoint?
Well, I don't know that it will ultimately be self-sufficient. I don't believe that type of historic site will be self-sufficient, just given the nature of it. And in terms of our plans, of course, the economy has thrown a monkey wrench in our plans here. We are working with District 205 The district is facing financial straits itself and may not be able to support the schoolhouse in the ways that we had originally planned by providing a part-time school teacher for District 205 students. We're working through that with District 205 at present. Our first year of operations at the schoolhouse are designed to provide some pilot programs, particularly for schools, to work out some of the kinks, to work out the interpretive plan that will be used as part of a social studies curriculum, and then in the second year to roll it out much more as an area-wide destination. We've done some research on other sites. For instance, Napier Settlement has a one-room school. Northern Illinois operates a one-room school on the campus of Northern Illinois. Midway Village in Rockford has a somewhat similar facility that's operated. So we've been looking at all of those for as a resource for the development of our plans.
Okay, as I look at the one-room schoolhouse, I'd like to see Heritage Foundation and the Historical Museum take it as a challenge to become self-sufficient, to look at what Wilder Park has done with the Wilder Mansion. There was a lot of, hand-wringing and debate on restoring the Wilder Mansion, and as we've come to learn, the Park District and the events that they have going on in that area is turning a profit. And so what was thought to be this yoke upon the city and then the Park District has really turned out to be a great thing for them, and they'll continue to have more things. I think the Historical Museum, contrary to what Alderman Pezza said, I think you guys need to look at yourselves like a business, because we are in terribly difficult times. I challenge us to really think, is the Historical Museum really core and critical? We've talked about things in the budget here. We're talking about not subsidizing senior taxi service. We were out looking on Saturday, a number of us, at a group home on the south side of Elmhurst. The only way those people can get around is a subsidized taxi. We're talking about rescue equipment for the fire department. There's a lot of things in our budget, tuition reimbursement, that we're not doing, that I think we got to look in balance as to what those are from a core and critical standpoint. And I appreciate that, that the Historical Museum does a lot of great things, but is it the best use of our money? Is it the most important thing we need to do? In this economy, we need to be looking at things that we need versus what we want. And so I think it's a great thing that City Manager Borchard is going to take this back and have a look at things. We're at a point now we're talking about increasing the garbage collection costs. That's a couple $100,000 or so to the residents. And I think we got to look at what are we getting for all that, and the Historical Museum needs to be part of that conversation. Thank you.
No problem, Alderman Kennedy. One thing too on the taxi service, that is definitely in the budget. The thing that we took out of the budget, I believe, was was the dial-a-ride. Ride-do-page, excuse me. That dial-a-ride, the taxi service is still in the budget, and we definitely would not go without that. Ride-do-page is something that we're postponing, although I think it would be a great program as well too. But as we heard, the seniors definitely want the taxi service, and more probably some of those seniors will be taking the taxi to the museum to see the museum too. So we got to picture that whole thing too, because the seniors love it. So, Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
I want to kind of go back to what Alderman Pezza was discussing just briefly in regards to revenue. The mayor actually brought up a good point in regards to the one-room schoolhouse and the revenue it may generate. But then, as he was mentioning that, I was turning to page 91 and 92 again, and I see 5 line items for the Historical Museum related to revenue. I don't see, other than what you've already mentioned from the, the Museum Foundation donations increasing from the 40 currently budgeted to the 79 approximately. I don't see any revenue stream, at least clearly stated in here, for increased revenue from the one-room schoolhouse. Is that in this budget? Is it insignificant? I mean, do we have any quantifiable numbers from that perspective?
The first year of programming at the schoolhouse is designed to service District 205 schools. It'd be this fall and next spring, where there would not be, or there'd be very minimal revenues for the schoolhouse.
But I wouldn't expect there to be revenue from that source anyway. From District 205, other districts, I was expecting a revenue stream. I just don't see any additional, maybe Maryland, maybe you could speak to it?
There is nothing in the budget as it stands today to represent a dollar amount for revenue.
From the one-room schoolhouse. Due to the rationale behind that, if I may ask? Is it insignificant the first couple of years where it's not needed to be budgeted, or what's the rationale for not budgeting it? Okay. Good, honest answer. Okay. Understood. Thank you. The line item 1600 on page 92, the EHS gifts, it was budgeted in 09-010 for $14,600. In previous years, it's been zero. This year, it's estimated under budget at $100 compared to the $14,600. But we're coming back this year and saying, okay, we're going to hit that $14,600 again, even though we didn't hit it last year or previous years. Can you explain your rationale for that revenue stream?
Sure. That $14,000 represents a grant from the District 205 Foundation for Excellence that was made a number of years ago, and it's being held to provide materials for the schoolhouse. We've been in contact over the last number of years with the District Foundation to ensure that the funds will be carried over. When the budget came together, we were expecting to spend just a few of those dollars in this fiscal year, with the balance to be spent next year. And so that $14,000 has been carried over year to year for the past at least half dozen years or more.
Okay, so we're as confident as we could be to see that revenue stream this year.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
We're as confident as we could be to see that revenue stream this year, since we've been expecting it for the last however many years.
Yeah, that's correct. It won't be spent unless we get it, but
makes sense. The last thing I just want to state is in regards to the Maryland, not to throw a name on it, but the Maryland summary that we received on the dais here. I want to make sure that we are aware that when we're referencing this, this is what's been budgeted. This is not actual. So when we're saying that we're seeing a savings, doesn't necessarily make complete sense from that perspective, because just because it's been budgeted in previous years, some of this was not spent in previous years either. And I'm not only speaking from Historical Museum, I'm speaking overall. So I just want to make a note of that. When we speak budget and actual, doesn't mean that we operated per budget last year. We operated under budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Brown. Anybody else for discussion? Okay.
Actually, one
Alderman
comment.
Hewlett, or Alderman Hipskin, I'm sorry.
One comment. We've been talking about the fence all night, and I do have to say you knocked one over the fence last Thursday night with Minnie Minosa and the Roberto Clemente. Excellent exhibit, and I'd encourage a lot of people to go out and see that. Really, it is. It truly is the history of America and American baseball. It's moving. So thank you for putting that on.
Thank you, sir. As far as time tonight, did we want to go late and get Mr. Hughes in after the museum, Mr. Borchard, or what are you thinking on time? Because I know we've got how many more Mondays before we approve?
The budget needs to be approved for the year.
get a new microphone.
Yeah, we don't have and I know that several have expressed a conflict with the fifth Monday in March, so my understanding is that we not have a meeting a week from tonight. It coincides with the 205 spring break. I think folks are out of town. It would be most beneficial if we had as many folks here as possible. So we've got four Mondays in April.
Okay.
After the council meeting, first Monday, second meeting, committee meetings. We anticipated there would be a lot of great discussion, as there has been this evening, on the museum. Public Works is close to core and critical. Public Works is our infrastructure, and that's what's left to be discussed.
Should we try and get that in tonight, then?
Let's do it.
We could get it started
Up
at
for
least
that,
at
we okay?
10:15. I think
Just want to make sure we don't have anybody,
take advantage
commitments
to at least 10:15, which I think is your target
absolutely.
target goal. We could make a dent.
Very good, very good. All right, any other discussion on museum or questions or concerns before we go on to Public Works?
And page 176 is visitor tourism, which is a operation with oversight from Mr. Berghager. Marlene Tegmeyer is our part-time visitor and tourism coordinator. We've dropped out of the DuPage Bureau for the year, which we also did last year. Would be a beneficial membership to maintain, but it's part of the pullback. We've felt that's an appropriate pullback, but we are attempting to maintain, as Alderman Pezza indicated, a lot of the visitor tourism, a lot of the museum activities, the marketing brings the Chicago metro area to the Elmhurst community, which is a good thing, helps the restaurants, and in a lot of ways helps bolster our real estate market.
Absolutely.
Any questions? That is a limited budget, but on page 176.
Very good. I see some of the commissioners leaving from the Historical Commission. We thank everybody for all their help back there. I know many of us were at the event, which had 300 plus. I see we have probably one of the youngest presidents on that commission, which I think is great to see. And hopefully your energy and enthusiasm will continue all the great things. And so I just wanted to mention that while those commissioners were leaving.
And in page 176 is again a visitor tourism area, which includes the community grant program, which has been reviewed in a preliminary way by the Finance Committee. Some significant reductions, but again, a commitment to continue to fund the
part-time position
events in our Elmhurst community, the symphony, the art museum, Lizadro, that provide great resources to the Elmhurst community itself and brings in visitors from the Chicago metro area in a major way.
And do we allow for DuPage the membership fee in here? No,
It's not.
It's not in here. Okay. That was what, about 20,000 or 25,000?
It's a percentage of one of the percents of the hotel tax revenue. We have had some discussions with potential partners in the Elmhurst community. If they could provide a match to part of an Elmhurst match, we might be able to bolster together enough support to maintain our membership. But it's been difficult to get matches. So at this point, we're not anticipating to be a member.
I see Marlene out in the audience there. Marlene, in your opinion, I know it's hard for you to speak, but is that going to really hurt your situation as far as being able to promote Elmhurst? A yes or no, or if you like to speak and you'd like to come up, you're more than welcome to. But I'm just a little concerned about that issue. But that's why I wanted to make a point of that. But as far as drawing people to our community and I know it's tough. We're working
Right.
with
We would
limited
rather, we would
dollars.
rather be recommending to spend the money, be a member.
Yeah.
But in this particular area of the budget, if there was that $20,000, we've reduced funding to the art museum, to the symphony, to the
Sure.
Lysander Museum, to the parades.
Yep.
A lot of very valuable events and organizations that have a significant core constituency and also have an audience that's Chicago Metro-wide that would be benefited with the support. So it's really been a share the hurt across all areas of the budget this year.
Okay. I wanted to make sure I asked, just to make sure I asked the question, and if anybody else has questions on tourism.
Appreciate your interest in that regard.
Sure.
If not, then we'll get started with Public Works.
Okay. Very good.
Which as Mr. Hughes comes forward, we've done this in sections of the Public Works operations, street and bridge, administrative, and then the maintenance areas, forestry, electrical, rubbish, and it is core and critical. We don't want to overstate it, but Mr. Hughes will provide a few opening remarks as to maybe the highlights of what is different and included in the budget and highlights of what is not able to be provided in the budget.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Mayor, City Council. Highlights are not real plentiful this year. I guess the short-term highlight is that we're starting to stand down from snow removal, so that's always a positive thing. We do have, on the brighter side, we do have some money coming in through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act for St. Charles Road, York to Poplar. We got that project funded. The First Street parking area is funded, and then separately through the Surface Transportation Program, we have a commitment on York and Brush Hill, and we have several other applications in. So we continue to pursue all the funding resources we can. Most of those are usually a split of some sort, but they're heavily leveraged towards the city's advantage. So we seek those out, and we will continue to.
Mike, what pages are those on, just out of curiosity, and as far as like the Metro, is that Metro money?
Most of those are back in the KEB, and then they're built into the operating numbers as well.
Okay.
And some of those were actually in last year's budget, but we've secured the funding.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may, Mr. Hughes, when you come across those line items where you are getting some funding from somewhere else besides the city, could you point those out in your process?
Yeah, definitely.
So we're looking at page, what page are we on, Mr. Hughes?
139.
139.
This is the administration account for streets and bridge. You'll see all of the administration for all the general fund items, streets, forestry, electrical, rubbish, building maintenance. Those are all contained in this admin account. There's a separate admin account on the water side, which we reviewed previously. So it's the admin, and then after that is more or less the operating of those different divisions. Move on. 143 is where we start to actually get into the operating. Which is, again, streets, and you can see the items that go into that. It's a rather involved and large budget, but if anyone had any questions.
Page you on, Mike?
143. Yeah, if you'll notice, we still do not have the 50/50 sidewalk program. We're running sidewalk replacement at a greatly reduced amount. We've curtailed chip and seal maintenance, storm sewer cleaning, and we've reduced our part-time budgets across the board drastically, which it's nice to have the cheaper labor to get some of the more menial tasks done, but we've cut that way back.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Alderman Brown, I apologize, go ahead.
Thank you. I have just a handful of questions on what you've already went over on page 139. And I know you have, I forgot what the form is called, but an explanation form for this line item, the engineering, line number 3026, engineering.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can do some of this in-house and not so much consulting? It seems that, it seems like it's a steady stream of engineering work. Sometimes it goes high, sometimes it sits around the 60s. But is there any way that we can do it in-house with our current engineering staff, or is this just the most efficient way, most cost-effective way to do it?
That number's up a little bit higher this year. This year we paid for about $40,000 for additional drainage studies with all the areas needed studying after the September 08 rains, and then the wet following spring. Then we entered into a couple of contracts where we studied some of those drainage areas with outside consultants. In that case, it's almost more time than ability. But the dollars in this account are basically used for plan review help whenever we have stormwater-related issues, because we're under the DuPage County Stormwater Ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
We have to stay in compliance with their ordinance. It's sort of an evolving document. It's fairly technical, and so we just don't have we don't have anyone in-house who's that expert. And then the other big chunk of that money goes out to expert help from our traffic consultants. So that's what is really in that line item.
On page 143, line item 3084, storm sewer cleaning. Now, this is actually a line item that you wouldn't think I would even ask a question because it was a reduced budget. But my concern here is, because it's a reduced budget, as you lay off a little bit of maintenance, you're going to see accelerated deterioration, accelerated problems. And my concern is really that, even though it was estimated for last year at $50,000 and we're cutting it by 1/5, or it's proposed to drop down to $10,000, is that really a wise area to cut because of the maintenance issues, the accelerated deterioration, the possible things getting thrown in the storm sewer and then causing flooding into individuals' homes, et cetera, which, as we've seen the rains lately, are very unpredictable.
Yeah, we're in our 4th year of an extremely wet cycle, as you're all well aware. It's not as much of a deterioration issue as they're generally concrete pipes, so they're pretty durable with long life cycles. It's more of a cleaning. You get buildup, you get debris, you get stone, and yeah, there's no doubt about it that cleaning is better than not cleaning.
Is it something that you would like us to consider as we go through this process to raise back up to the $50,000? Is that one of the high priorities?
Well, I think that
bigger bang for the buck?
Our original hope was, because, again, if you remember back, 2005, this area was declared extreme drought. We built up into that to 2003, 4, 5. By 5, we were considered an extreme drought. Then 2007, 8, 9, wettest years on record. So we started having more problems, started looking into it, and found some areas that we could clean. Our plan was to do cleaning in problem areas till we felt we had them all pretty cleaned up, and then be flopping back and seeing how long does it take till the problems recur, because they generally will in a storm sewer. It's weather dependent over time, but hoping that at some point we could come up with a return period where we could maybe budget less each year and just keep doing it, but we were trying to get ahead of it a little bit and then monitor it. But $10,000, it's not something we were doing 10 years ago, so to some degree it's an improvement, but it would be nice to do more.
Okay. I'm not in the habit of actually asking if you want more money, as you've heard my previous conversations, but I just wanted to highlight that because of the possible cause and effect. Thank you.
Alderman Wagner, you had a question, I think?
I did.
About Alderman Pezza?
Thanks, Mike. Page 139, line item 2004. To the untrained eye, it looks a little askew from the actual salaries. Just wondering if I could get a quick explanation of that.
I'm sorry.
You're speaking of the health insurance, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
the
line
health insurance line, the employee benefits in the administration budget is the employee benefits for the most part, particularly health insurance, dental insurance, for all of the public works departments in general fund. So when we look further down and we get to forestry and we get to the streets division, you're not going to see health insurance or dental insurance. It's all right there on that one line.
So it's for all the public works employees,
Right.
administrators
Right.
and the guys in the trenches. Gotcha.
That's why it looks so odd compared to the salary line.
So when we get to those other areas, we'll see offsetting zeros or reductions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks.
Alderman Pezza.
Thank you. Page 143, 3055, the rear yard drain program. I know for me personally, in my ward, I get many requests. It seems like more and more people want or need this service. And I'm just wondering if, following Alderman Bram's lead, if we think this is enough for that program. That's one thing I would really hate to turn away. Do you feel that's enough, or how long of a waiting list do we have right now for those? Can you shed some light on that?
We did 64 rear drains last year. We have 118 outstanding requests. We have estimates out for 56 of those, and we have 62 still to get estimates. So it's a, it is an outstanding program that does really help people a lot, and that is all pretty much engineered in-house. It's one engineer that has that as part of his job description, and he stays quite busy. With the 56 outstanding estimates, we kind of get to the point that we keep doing them, because what'll happen is we'll do an estimate for someone and it's drive for a while and they don't call, and then we get a gully washer and 12 of them will call in. So at $50,000 a year, theoretically, with the city contributing $1,000, we could do 50. Theoretically.
So how many people will not get one next year if all the requests stand? That means
78. I'm sorry, 68.
68 people will not get one. Is there another area where we can cut back on something and give more to this? Because I think it's really a need. One thing that comes to my mind is the street pole painting, which I still think that's a lot of money. I saw it someplace what was budgeted for that. I'd rather spend less money on painting street lights and be able to supply more rear yard drains. So I'm just wondering if there's some place we can take and provide more of these drains.
Incidentally, we canceled streetlight pole painting for next year and
good.
the year after.
Thank you.
There's a lot of just eliminations of areas of service that aren't essential service. And relative to rear yard drains, if there is any rear yard drain that is necessary to provide for protection of the improvements on the property, meaning that the garage floods or the house actually floods with surface water, that rear yard drain will be put to the top of the list. In nearly all cases, these rear yard drains are draining a area of a yard, quality of life for that yard owner, but it's not as core and critical as the other areas of infrastructure that the Public Works Department and its director have prioritized with other spending. It's not what we would recommend. There's not a department head that would say they're satisfied with the budget that they have had approved through the budget committee. This is all a throttled area of spending to make things work.
Very good.
But we will, even in the areas where it's been throttled, as an example, Alderman Pez's case of a rear yard drain, if there are areas of flooding that are more egregious, and if there's any structures that are potentially going to be flooded, that project will go to the top of the list.
Very good. It's important too, I know Alderman Healy mentioned that, you know, those that stepped up and voted for this levy, if we hadn't done that, none of these things would be possible. So I would impress upon the alderman that voted no in the future, keep that in mind, because when you're asking for dollars and you vote no on a levy, it's very difficult, you know, to, I think, to fathom what would be like if we hadn't gotten a levy passed. So I think it's important that we go, you know, many of us came together and got that done. So kudos to that group, and hopefully in the future we'll get support from those in the first ward with their drain problems and be able to do the extra 68. So, because it'd be very difficult to do any if we didn't get a levy passed. So, anything else on Public Works?
You know, on this one, just a sort of to follow up on Tom's comment, it's a really minor thing, but it sort of goes to keeping things nice. If you look on the bottom of page 143, the very last item there, crack filling material. I know not exciting stuff, but it does help keep the roads going, and the reason we don't have enough part-timers to do the crack filling, so we're not doing it. So it's, you know, it's not good.
Alderman Wagner.
Along the lines of not a huge item, but barricade rentals. Are you saying we're unable to make those?
What line item, Pat?
I'm sorry. 3006. It's page 143. It's not a whole heck of a lot of money, but I was just wondering, can we make our own barricades?
Well, they're generally plastic now. They're a lot more durable, and they don't shatter when a car hits them, so you don't get that chunk of wood going. But, yeah, we would still have to buy the flashing lights. Really what a lot of that comes from is when we have, like, say, a large water main break on Butterfield, and we have to, you know, buy or rent a bunch for a short period of time and get an air board out there that Nafisco or someone sets up. In like for block parties, we have our own purchased ones.
Right.
So, but this is more for construction for larger projects. We have a fair amount of them at the garage, but we can't do a single or double lane closure on a Butterfield Road or one of the larger streets.
Follow up, Alderman Wagner.
The actuals, before in 07, 08, 08, 09, same line item. Do you think that's indicative of a typical year?
Yeah, you know, if I was to guess, it's probably related. You could probably relate it back to how many water main breaks we had out on Route 83 or on North Avenue or something. Because if we have a main break on Route 80 or on North Avenue, we might have a full-blown lane closure out there for a long time. So, in those cases, we not only have it out there while we dig, we then have to pour the concrete and let the concrete cure. So you could have a pretty, you know, sizable barricade set up for days.
Thanks.
Michael, as far as street paving, as far as number of miles we're going to are in the budget for this next coming year, what are we looking at there?
Well, again, we have a lot of applications in for funding, and one of those applications is for funding of Spring Road from York to Villette from York to Spring, and Spring from basically Villette down to Harrison. If we get all the money that would pave that project would be about 2.5 miles, all of streets that really need that work. So that would be about half of the target. So we budgeted half, the $875 for various residential streets. But we're still kind of waiting to see what comes in. They just had a letting at IDOT the last week, and Thursday the DuPage County Mayors and Managers Conference Transportation Technical Committee will be meeting to look at those bids, and they will de-obligate and reallocate, because the bids that they've been opening at IDOT have been coming in about 80% of their estimate, which is generating some more money, so they de-obligate that and then can reappropriate it to projects further down the line. Spring and Villette, those two streets are a B-listed project right now, and we're hopeful that they'll get funded. We're hearing they're going to be funded to at least $925,000, but we won't know for sure till Thursday. So that's kind of how we're hoping to do it this year. It's an unusual year with the ARRA money, but it works to our advantage.
So if we get the state funding and we have what we, you know, are allowing for. We may get to 5 miles, possibly?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Which I think is our-
basically 50% funded by the feds.
Okay, terrific. Great. Alderman Brown, and I'll go Alderman Healy.
Thank you. On page 140, and this is actually throwing out a kudos, 6037 line item, memberships. I just want to take note that, you know, in these times, you reduced your memberships from 18,000 estimated this past year to below, even in previous years, 07, 08, 08, 09, to 11,400 from a budgeted perspective. The other question I have is, or two questions, one being on page 144, line item 4020, guardrail and fence material. Is a reason why $10,000 has been estimated going forward compared to previous years?
It's just what we've been carrying. That probably actually could be reduced, just if you look at the history.
Okay.
Yeah, it's, as Tom said, figuratively and literally, it's the spending fence. You know, generally, if someone goes through a guardrail that we got to fix, we could get near that number. We don't stock it anymore, you know, but so we have to go get it. But we had a gentleman end up in the quarry a number of years ago, and we had to rebuild that whole barricade. So.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, last year, yeah, we spent the 10,000, but in previous years, it seemed pretty minimal. So I just was curious on why it was being budgeted for that amount going forward. And then the last question I have in this section is about vehicles, capital outlay, 8006. We're showing 0, so we're not purchasing any?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And if I could, I have to come full disclosure. I appreciate Alderman Bram's compliment on our restraint, but that was a reallocation. In that budget is, I think, $14,000 for the Salt Creek Work Group membership, and this year it was decided to split half between general fund and half with utility funds, since it does sort of relate to effluent and what comes from treatment plants and studying that. So thank you, though.
I tried.
Alderman Healy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to go back to the road resurfacing. And I've asked this question committee, but I want to ask it out loud, and I want to make sure I am crystal clear. Spring Road, the federal money is from Villette south to Harrison, correct?
Correct.
Villette north to St. Charles is going to get done. That is budgeted, that is going to get done, regardless of whether we get federal money.
Correct.
Thank you. That's what I thought, just want to make sure. Then the last question specific to street repaving. If we don't get that federal money, are we only going to do 2.5 miles this year? Or are we still going to do 5 and we've got to figure out where to get it, or are we only going to do 2.5? I mean, it sounds like we might get it, but let's talk worst case, we don't get it. How many miles of road are we doing this year?
I think the goal is still to get 5. We would have to evaluate how that's going to get done.
But in terms of budget, in terms of this budget, if we don't get the federal money, it's 2.5 miles approximately.
Correct. But we also do have some funding in for the Spring and Villette job that was going to be city portion that
That's the
perhaps we
curb
could add to the 2.5 miles right there.
Okay. And that, you know, Alderman Pezza mentioned the rear yard drain, and certainly that's important, but street paving is very important. But I also understand that if I try to get 2.5 more miles into the budget, we got to take 2.5 more miles out of the budget somewhere. But that is something that, as far as I'm concerned, would be the number one add back in is the street paving. But I don't have any answers this time. That's just kind of a, hope things get better and that the money's there at some point so we can add that back in. But I understand it's difficult right now.
Yeah, hopefully on Thursday we'll get some good news.
Good news. Thank you.
Yep. Very good. Anybody else? And we just spent last week in Springfield, and I think we kind of saw firsthand that it's a challenging situation down there. We've got a few dollars allocated for professional services that need to maybe have to put somebody down there on a full-time basis to fend for grants and make sure Elmhurst brings home as much state money and federal money that comes through the state as possible. So it's not years ago where we had Peyton Lee down there and they were in control. It's almost the opposite situation. So the need to actually have somebody else advocate in our behalf is something that may be more pressing and more imminent, especially with what's at stake with grant dollars. So, and given the situation with the state. Alderman Hipskin.
Mike, if we're going to get that news on Thursday, if we could get a note in our packet, that would be great. I'd love to hear that as soon as possible, if the time allows.
Yeah, if not, I'll make sure it's on the dash for Monday night.
Thank you.
You bet.
So, anything else? Questions, discussion?
Should we keep moving? If we could at least get snow removal and ice control if you're interested. Sure. My understanding, you try to do a rolling average of history to estimate going forward with understanding of the market price of salt and of some of the other fees that need to be paid when there's a contracting out requirement for snow hauling is a point, but we don't spend it if it doesn't snow. If it snows, we need to spend it.
Alderman Wagner's got a question real quick.
What's the longevity of the salt? Can you use it if you don't use it all in 1 year? Can you use it next year?
Yeah, as long as it's covered, it'll last forever.
It will?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's why we usually try to buy whatever's left on our contract this year, because inevitably it's been going up every year, and it can sit all year without a problem.
So keep it covered. All right.
Actually, I do have a quick comment about the salt. When we were going through this in committee, we had stated that we were going to, our estimate was 266. We've got 235 here from a budget standpoint. Shouldn't those two be equivalent?
Well, as City Manager Borchard, I think the Finance Department has kind of done a rolling average type of thing. The last 4 years have started to move that average. We had another bad year this year, 52 inches of snow. Our average is 38. We went over on overtime, and we went over the budget on salt. I'm not sure if it could be budgeted as a different number or how that would work.
I just know we approved one number and we're budgeting something significantly different here.
Right. Currently, for next year, we put in for 4,000 tons of salt. The contract allows us to buy up to 120%. Right. This year's dollar value, the 4,000 tons would be 266. If we go all the way to the 120, it'd be 319.
I understand the moving average and all that, but I would think we would budget what we're kind of commit ourselves to.
It's kind of like sales tax. It's a moving target, it seems like, which is, given our Chicago weather, has been a little tough to.
But we're on the hook for the amount, though.
Oh, right, absolutely.
80% of it.
Right.
We got to buy 80%.
Yeah.
The budget was completed. We'll take a look at the general fund budget as offensive spending. We might determine we could actually spend more this fiscal year because we may have some room in the general fund to fill the salt storage bin area on a price that's still this year's price if we've got the ability to do so, which would be an expenditure this fiscal year that we wouldn't need to spend the next fiscal year. We'll use the salt next year, the purchase that's left over from this year, and try to do the same thing again next year. But I understand what Alderman Kennedy's point is. There's been an allocation that is probably more than $235,000 if all the salt would be purchased after May 1st and before April 30th.
Mm-hmm. How's the price on salt? Is it up or is it down?
'07 we paid $37, '08 we paid $57, and '09 we paid $66.
Nice.
And we did better than a lot of communities.
Right. Alderman Wagner.
How many tonnage do we have left, Mike?
You know, we get about 1,000 left, so.
How much does one of the storage facilities hold?
Our facility holds about 1,600? Yeah, if we bucket up pretty high, 1,600 tons. And then we also use the shed, the small shed that we have for dirt in the summer for storing topsoil for restoration and stuff. We empty that and we can put another 300 or 400 tons in that. So as soon as we start using, we start ordering. And within the Public Works building plan in the Phase 2, which is the property immediately south of the garage, it's hoped that on that we can build a permanent 4,000 to 5,000 ton salt shed. So we have it at the beginning of the season.
Alderman Healy?
Just one point, though, that we attempt, the city staff certainly, but it goes before the committee, we attempt to account for that overage. So if we expect to carry 1,000 into the next year, that's accounted for when they project their purchases for next year. So it's not really gravy. So when we say we're going to buy 4,000 tons, it's because we think we're going to have, as I recall, we thought we were going to have 800 tons approximately left over.
Correct.
Might be off a little bit on that. So it's really not gravy. It's they try to button it down pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Anybody else? On salt. Sounds like we should get in the salt business. $66 from 39. Nice.
Forestry will keep going forward.
Yeah, I think we're going to try and finish this up if we can. Is everybody okay with staying a little later than 10:15? Yep. All right.
Forestry, we did find a way to put tree purchase back in and tree planting back in the budget. Other areas are cut, but Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, the tree removal item, which is 3088. This year we did add in within that number is 37,500 to remove 115 ash trees, which is about 5% of the city's ash. And all of the experts at the Morton Arboretum are encouraging people to start on getting rid of the ash, which is, the emerald ash borer is here. It's not in Elmhurst yet, but it's in the area, and it's inevitable. Their point is, one, if you can get started on it, you can spread out the budget burden, which is obviously going to be significant. And in addition, if you wait, you'll lose all your trees in 2 or 3 years, and you'll have a real loss in your canopy, and that canopy provides air cooling, water absorption, oxygen. So they're suggesting that if you start early, then by the time you actually lose your last ash, you will have a 10-year-old tree that will help offset that foliage loss, or canopy loss. So there's money in there to get started on that. So we had originally sort of floated a 10-year plan to the city manager, and he throttled it back to, which would have been 10%, throttled it back to 5%.
Very good. Alderman Peasant, I'll go to Alderman Healy.
Thanks. I'm looking at, as far as landscaping, I know one of the items in those 30 questions from residents a while back, one of the questions was about sharing with other bodies. And one of the responses was that other agreement possibilities being considered include grass mowing with the park district. I'm just wondering if we looked into that, explored that, what happened with that?
Yeah, we've explored that, and we look at that on an ongoing basis with the park district. They share the city's facility down on Riverside Drive, so we're very familiar with their operations. We have taken any areas where we are next to each other and said, well, this is silly for us to drive there and do it, and then you drive there and do it, and try to swap them out for another area so that only one of us is making a trip. And I think we've pretty much found all of those areas. But they do their mowing in-house, and I know that's part of their program. So I don't know if they've ever looked at outsourcing mowing or not. Then we could probably really get more bang for the buck, but they have staff, and they're staffed to mow their properties, so if at the time they would outsource, then that would probably be a more advantageous route to look at.
Alderman Healy, and then I'll go to Alderman Kennedy.
Just 2 quick points. Thank you, Mayor. 3077 tree planting, just want to point out the tree planting is back in the budget. It was out last year. I know a lot of us heard a lot of complaints from residents about trees, so they're back in. And then secondly, 3091, it was approved just tonight in committee. It should be on our next city council agenda that we're going to remove the Dutch elm disease injections from the plan next year, so that's 20,000 that can come out. And, we can discuss when it's in the agenda, assuming the whole council passes it. But it's just something we've done for how many years, Mike? 5 years?
We've probably been doing some injecting for 15. I know we've been doing it for at least 10, but I think it might even go back a little before that. But we only started doing privates about 10 years ago. I think we were injecting some of our own specimen elms prior to that.
And it's something that even the experts aren't sure works. So we figured we can take a year off and see what, if anything, happens, but that's coming out of the budget.
And we've been, just if I could add to that, we've been monitoring what we're seeing is the efficacy of the injections, and what we're finding is, even though a big chunk of what we inject is our specimen healthiest, strongest elms, the mortality rate in the injected elms is really the same as the mortality rate in the population at large. So it's tough to say you're getting a big bang for your buck. Everyone wants to do everything they can for the trees, but maybe it just didn't survive this year. And if I could follow up on Alderman Healy's comment on the tree planting, we went a whole year without replacing trees, which created a backlog of 400 trees, and then last year we lost 400 trees. The plan is to, at least this year, replace the first 400 and half of the second 400, and hopefully the budget will allow that we can next year do the same thing, and then in 2 years we'll have caught up from the 1 year we missed. That's the plan.
So we lost 400 trees the year we didn't plant.
It's pretty much our average, right? But we did.
And we were normally planting 400 too.
Well,
correct?
we lost them the year before. We lose them this year. We plant them next year.
Okay, I got you. So we're playing a little catch up, and fortunately, Mr. Borchard has found a way to, along with staff, Mr. Hughes, to get this back in. So I know, likewise, residents have been in my ear about this issue too. So, Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mike, page 150, just a quick clarification with the tree planting versus the trees. Is there a different species that we're talking about here? The one that's $100 a piece versus the ones that are 200?
I'm sorry, which page are you on?
150, the
J form.
Yeah, the J form. The top one says 715 trees at $100 per tree, and the down below says 715, $200 a tree. So is that a typo, or are there different species? Oh, okay. Oh,
isn't one the
it's
labor
purchase
and one the
versus
trees?
planting?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. I didn't understand the question.
My mistake. Thank you.
It's okay, Alderman. Anybody else? Questions? Mr. Borchard?
It's $300 a tree.
I don't think we're going to get, I don't know how late you want to stay, but we've got a lot of public works left. Just keep
going.
Keep rolling.
How we doing? Everybody up? Coffee?
Keep going.
Keep going.
Let's go.
Electrical. The good news is, I guess, there's not a lot of highlights to talk about, but
Yeah, right.
We'll touch base on these items.
Yeah.
Mr. Hughes, just walk us through to public benefits, but electrical next.
Very much the standard operating procedure. We've removed the pole painting. That contract won't happen, and we've deferred an aerial unit, $175,000 from the 10-11 budget. rubbish, which is on page 154. This is the work that is done by Allied Waste. We're in the third year of a 5-year contract right now, and that's obviously the big number you see there.
I just would comment, we have identified that the contract prices with Allied do not increase, so we've got our expenses identified accurately, but there are other support staff that goes towards waste collection, administration, and services, and the fees associated with that would, from a costing perspective, allow and support and justify modest user fee increases relative to waste handling, which the Public Works Committee is reviewing. To be clear, our contract prices are locked in for the next fiscal year. Other expenses of staff and support staff, those costs continue to go up and provide an opportunity for a fee adjustment that, from an operations perspective, looking at not spending anything that doesn't need to be spent and identifying any revenue that can be identified as a proper collection, this would be an area of an opportunity for some additional collections for those folks who use these services. So more to hear about the revenue side on Allied Waste or the rubbish disposal area coming. Municipal buildings is...
Question on health and welfare under the rubbish. Is that a separate line item? I see at the bottom there it says health and welfare. Is that because we're contracting that out? I'm just curious if that's what that line item indicates. It's on page 154 at the bottom of.
Looks like it's a total. Oh, it's a total.
Oh, that's a total. I apologize. My fault.
Maybe a definition of health.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a subtotal of all
If one highlight in the building maintenance, you'll see under engineering, there's a $50,000 item in there for engineering. That is a energy efficiency block grant for an energy audit that Pat Morley was able to secure working with Dennis Stryker. So that's $50,000 is fully funded.
Alderman Wagner?
Mike, I just missed a lot of that. Could you explain what that is again?
Sure. The city applied for and received a block grant, an energy efficiency block grant. Some of the money went to the treatment plant for a generator, and then $50,000 is going for an energy audit of city buildings, and so that's what that $50,000 in the engineering column is there.
What line item is that, please?
It's on page 155.
3026.
3026. I'm sorry, 3026.
And is that a federal or state grant or?
It's federal.
Federal block grant. Okay. Alderman Brown?
Thank you. To stick on that topic, are you saying that we needed to have a consultant do that energy audit or write the grant? I'm not clear still on what that $50,000 is.
Pat and Dennis, working with Peg Orsonanen in finance, wrote the grant. So now that money is coming to pay a consultant, an energy consultant to analyze our buildings.
Okay. And then just another question from the previous section. I'm actually happy on page 154, Recycling Education Program, 6046. This is something I mentioned a couple years ago, asking if Allied could be so kind to come in and talk about recycling and what can and cannot be recycled, because I think that there's confusion out there in the community, not only ours but others. So I'm glad to see that minimal dollar amount is budgeted, because the more we recycle, the better for sustainability and actually better for maybe our trash removal costs as a whole.
Yeah, agreed. We do try to keep it constantly in the front porch of what's available and what's not, and on the city website too.
Alderman Pezza?
Thank you. Page 154, 9501. I'm not finding the J page to explain that increase.
That's the IT, I think.
The data processing services is the allocation of the information technology budget. So you're right, there is not a J form each time this appears, but those J forms would be in the information technology budget. It is a significant increase. I think we mentioned this once before, and that's because of adjustments in the IT budget.
Buildings have property manager.
Any other questions? Okay.
Anything else, any questions on building maintenance, or should we move on to?
Mr. Mayor, just one question.
Alderman Brown?
Yeah, I missed this before. On page 156, property management services. From a public works perspective, what is the explanation to that? I did see that it reduced by 30,000 approximately, but.
This is management services, David King and Associates, and they manage the building at 180 West Park. And that is a city-owned building, and all the space there is rented out, and they're the management service that manages that building.
Okay, so it falls under public works for whatever reason.
Right, because from time to time, you know, the public works folks have keys to that building and may need to approve if there's a huge expense that would have to come through, a new furnace or a new, you know, something. Our public works people would have to weigh in on that decision.
Okay, thank you.
Why the big reduction?
Is it allocated someplace else, maybe in the budget?
There's
Because they've got a couple buildings they manage for us,
the
don't they?
Han Street
Street
building too,
Yeah.
and there's reduced.
The only explanation that can be is that we're estimating fewer leases, and that could be the case. I would need to look at that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but the charges that go into this line are the management fees that are a function of the lease income, the rental income that comes in.
Marilyn.
So I will look at that, and I will get back to you.
Thank you.
Alderman York is a...
Yeah, Marilyn, isn't
Objection?
that related to the Han Street building because there's reduced rentals over there now in
The Han Street building, those charges from David King and Associates are in the redevelopment fund.
Right.
You'll see those in the TIF fund. The 180 West Park building was not paid for with TIF funds. They were paid for with other city funds.
Right.
Therefore, those are charged in the general fund.
Gotcha.
But Han Street is TIF fund, and TIF money is used for that building, and those charges will go to the TIF fund.
Yeah. Marilyn, the revenue on that 180 Park building, what's the revenue versus expenses roughly? I know it's turning a profit for us, which I think is a good thing. Is it roughly $250,000 or $235,000, something like that? When we?
You know, I cannot
Okay.
say off the
That's
top
okay.
of my head. Tom, do you have a recollection of it?
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, I can't. I can get back to you on that.
No problem.
But I don't know. But you're right, it is running out of profit.
We're making money.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good thing. Alderman Pezza.
Just quick, so are we, I guess what we're saying is King is paid per lease, like a commission or whatever to handle per lease. So I would hope that we'd be able to fully lease that space once again. So how would we provide then, I guess if we get more revenue on the lease, we could pay him, but is there a provision for, hopefully, are we trying to lease the spaces that are currently not being leased? Or are we going to leave them vacant, or what's the plan for that?
We are trying to lease them, yes, because we're going on for another 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, council provided a date authorization to provide leasing, and it's getting more and more leased up to that date. And as Marilyn explained, there is the contract, which was approved by the city council with King, provides that as they lease, they get a fee for that lease. Because they're more and more leased, I think that's why this is going down, because there's less of an opportunity to lease because they've done the job. We'll get it. It's interesting to see the profit loss on that piece of property. It is a very successful venture that is providing an opportunity for the city in the future. So we'll get that work up for you. It would be interesting for you to see that. It's positive.
Very good, very good. Any other discussion, Alderman Brown, you okay? All righty.
I am fine, thank you for having me.
Page 158 is equipment
We're almost
maintenance.
due for meatloaf. What do you think?
All right.
Mr. Borchard, next.
Equipment maintenance is 158, 160. This is the joint operation at the municipal garage, fleet maintenance.
Right, the Public Works Department maintains all of the city's vehicles, including fire, police, public works, as well as maintaining all of the Park District vehicles. The Park District, there's a existing agreement where the Park District pays for one mechanic, which equates to about the amount of hours that we spend on their equipment. And we also run fuel dispensing out at the garage for the city, Park District, and the school district.
And public benefits is 160, 162, which...
Real quick, Alderman Wagner had a hand up here.
Right, Mike, the fuel seems to be going down. Is that just because there aren't as many trucks that are operating right now because of the cutbacks?
It's just gas prices.
They went down.
From '07?
Oh, yeah.
That was one
Yeah,
of
they
those,
were
like,
$4
$4 a
bucks.
gallon.
Oh, yeah, that's right, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Should we go 3 cents? No.
And on page 161, 162, there's J forms. Describe most of it. Anything additional, Mr. Hughes?
As you can see, there's no money in the next couple of years for new sidewalk. That's what item 8034 is, sidewalk improvement. There are several in the queue, but at this time there's no funding for it.
It would be appropriate to highlight that from the perspective of, again, core critical necessary infrastructure. Sidewalks are not as important as streets. Sidewalks, we're having a hard time even providing the maintenance of the existing sidewalks. It was felt that until the economy returns, the typical 50-50, city 50% for public benefit, homeowner 50% would be inappropriate to be financing new improvements of sidewalk when we're having a hard time maintaining what we've got. So until the economy returns or absent a direction from the council to the contrary, we've not budgeted for new sidewalks.
I know, Alderman,
If a
some of the...
neighborhood would want to pay 100%, we could certainly do that, but
Right.
if there's an anticipation of the neighborhood for the city to pay half the cost, can't find a way for that to work out this year.
It's probably one of the most touchiest items up here over the last year. I'm sure there'll be debate on this one. Alderman Brown, and I'll go to Alderman Morley.
Thank you. I just want to, voice my concern once again. I touched on it when we talked about the capital improvement fund, because that's where this comes out of. But I respect your opinion, City Manager Borchert, but I would like to strongly suggest that we try to find a way to at least fund, maybe not the 200 or 240 that we budgeted in the past, but something for sidewalk improvements. I think it's definitely an increase in safety for the neighborhoods that don't have them, and I don't want to get into a debate about this tonight, especially at this late hour, but I do want to, voice my concern of absolutely not doing anything for the next 2 years, especially that some of the areas have put in the effort already and have been approved to move forward, and it would be a shame to put a damper on that program when it's just getting off the ground.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Morley?
I do have a question for Mr. Hughes. If there is $200,000 in the budget for sidewalk improvements, is that $400,000 in sidewalks with a 50-50 match? Am I reading that correctly?
Actually, what happens, since these are run through a special service agents area, we have to fund the whole value of the contract. The guy who builds that sidewalk is gonna need to be paid fully, so we estimate somewhere between $150,000, $200,000. Again, looking forward where we don't even know what projects are, to totally construct it, and then the city recoups 50% through the tax.
Okay, so in the case of $200,000 here, theoretically, the city would recoup $100,000 of it.
Right.
I find myself surprised at 10:45, but I do agree with Alderman Brown.
Bram.
Oh, my apologies. The only reason I question this is that we have figured out, and I appreciate Mr. Borchert has figured out how to put trees back in the budget. That's great, but if I were a homeowner and I had literally the sidewalk that cuts across my driveway that my kids ride their bikes on, I bet from a perspective that sidewalk's more important than the tree on the parkway. I don't think it's that much money. I would like to see, if there is, the possibility of finding some of that, much like you mentioned with the ash borer replacement, maybe not all of it. I'd like to see some of it back in if it's possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman. Question for City Manager Borchert and Marilyn. Is there any type of motor fuel increase budgeted in here? We haven't voted on that issue yet, but we were looking at a task force recommendation of $250,000 to $500,000, depending if we went to penny and a half or 3 cents. Is that already anything factored in here as far as revenue for that?
Yes, we anticipated, with the direction from the rolling off of the discussion from the Citizens Task Force, that there would be that special service, there would be that fee attached for the users of the streets, and there would be, I believe the task force recommended
2 cents.
more than what we've identified. We've identified, I think, a 2-cent tax, penny and a half.
Penny
tax,
and a half.
Penny and a half tax as a revenue that's part of what the budget's balanced on. So absent that revenue, there's a hole.
And again, the task force didn't see sales tax from September, October, November, December, which was horrible for us.
The time, right. The time
So,
the task force completed their work, they identified, with city staff's help, we were complicit in that. Best estimates that we had, they had together, we estimated the end of the fiscal year, and the revenues have fallen off an additional $2 million. So we're $2 million short of what the task force anticipated when they made their recommendations, and their recommendations did include nearly $500,000 in motor fuel tax.
Okay. So for those of us that stepped up for this levy, which I appreciate, and we did it as a team, and this motor fuel is still going to be a number that we're going to need to get done, ideally, hopefully on the upper end, so that we could fund these projects. And having just bought a hybrid that gets about 50 miles to the gallon, I can understand. My car's using less gas and tearing up more roads. So it's really critical that we hopefully get this done here. Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A general comment. Alderman Pezza mentioned rear yard drains. I mentioned road surfacing. Alderman Morley and Bram have mentioned sidewalks, and I would support all of those. I think they're all very worthwhile. But each one of us then said, staff, figure out a way to make it happen. We were presented a budget that was structurally balanced with some revenue assumptions that, the motor fuel is in there. That's an assumption because we haven't passed it yet. And I believe the rubbish increase was in there. That's an assumption because we as a council have not passed that yet. There are some assumptions on revenue based on state income tax. That's an assumption because the state might whack the you-know-what out of it. So we've got a structurally balanced budget based with some revenue assumptions that, God, I hope they all come in, but I'm not counting on it. With that in mind, I think it's incumbent upon us as a council, whether it's streets, rear yard drains, sidewalks, that we've got to step up and say, I want to put this $200,000 in so I can take this $200,000 out. Because we've put staff in a bad position by just saying, I hope you can find it. That's my personal belief. If I really want to make sure we get 5 miles of street paved, I'll find the money to do it and then throw it in front of the council and we'll say yes or no. But I think it's, I don't want to say a disservice, and this is my first time going through it, so I might be way off base. But I think I think we put staff in a bad position by just saying, I hope you can find the money. If I really want to get something done, I think I've got to throw it out there and say, here's how I do it, yes or no, let's go. The one thing in my last comment, the one thing I personally won't do is pass a vote for a budget that is structurally has a deficit or that I think is based on too many revenue assumptions that aren't going to come home. With that in mind, I agree with that. I agree with sidewalks. I agree with rear yard drain. We just got to be very careful. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman, and I think it's important too that we understand that as the year progresses too, what we passed, before May, we will be watching as one, we want a balanced budget. That's obvious, no argument. I think we'll be watching those revenue streams. We'll be watching sales tax. We'll be watching Springfield. We may have somebody down there banging on doors for us that can get to both sides of the aisle. And so there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to really be needing to keep an eye on. So I totally agree. But again, I applaud the team for stepping up with the levy, and I hopefully applaud the team for stepping up for the motor fuel, because again, that assumption is there. City Manager Borchert?
Just quick, I know it's late. We did, I think, reasonably accurately identify on page 6 and 7 of the transmittal letter the budget concerns that Alderman Healy has repeated some of them. Those budget concerns, though, are to make a point, in real life, a point, because of fund balance. Fund balance in our staff position perspective can't go any lower. We're lower with your authority as a city council to go lower than your preferred 3 to 4 months. You've identified a directive of a desired 3 to 4 months. The council has authorized us to operate below that level. From an operations perspective, we just cannot allow it to go any lower. Marilyn and Tom are working on a much more regular basis, watching that fund balance, watching where the dollars are, because, as an example, last week, payroll checks would not have cleared the bank had there not been an adjustment on where the dollars were in the general fund to cover payroll. Our fund balance is that perilously thin. There's money there, but it's in different places, and like your own personal accounts, you got to make sure when you use the check that there's money in the checking account. You might have the money in the bank account, but not the checking account. It's in your savings, not your checking or your Christmas savings. But that's how thin we are now in the general fund. We're watching it for accounts payable and payroll checks.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We appreciate the status on that. Got a question? Alderman Pezza?
Thanks. Getting quickly back to the tree sidewalk issue. So we have zero balance for the sidewalk improvements, which used to be about 200,000, and then we have like 70-some for the tree planting. The tree planting, the city pays 100% for, correct? Is that Parkway trees, we'd pay 100%?
Yes.
Have we ever explored the thought, because some people would rather have a tree, some people would rather have a sidewalk, of splitting that and doing a 50-50 tree program or a 50-50 sidewalk program and kind of balance it out that way? I don't know if that's possible, but
the city's participation in funding initial infrastructure and then funding the repairs of infrastructure is a policy that is somewhat self-imposed by the city council with discussion with the community and staff. Past practice has been public benefit of 50% for new sidewalk improvements, and for maintenance of 50-50, more or less. Not exactly 50-50, but it's pretty close to 50-50. And on trees, though, if it's a Parkway tree, it's a city tree, the city is responsible for it, and if it is removed, the city tries to provide the replacement for it with proper spacing and proper city design of that urban forest, but it's been 100%. doesn't have to be. Other communities aren't as high of quality of life in that regard, and will charge for trees.
I'm just thinking if, you know, at least this way, then there would be an option for both, as Alderman Morley said. Some people really would rather have a tree, sidewalk than a tree, and at least this way, it's kind of in their hands, 50-50. I guess it's something to look at. We could supply both, but at a 50-50 level rather than 0 on one and all of the other. I mean, we don't own our sidewalks either, and we're still paying 50-50, so it's kind of the same concept, I guess.
I would think, from a staff perspective, we have put a circle around our museum budget, around sidewalks, and around trees, and we know we want to go back to revenues before we finish our budget review, but I think we need to touch base again with you all on that to make sure that with you as a group, and again, past occasions, there have been the need for a vote. Let's get a consensus, let's get a vote, and we decide. And then staff is directed to make the appropriate adjustment. So we may need to, after the discussion, we get done with all of the budget expenditures, take a look at the revenues, recap. How does it look? We are watching sales tax on a month-by-month basis. The last month was a little bit better than the previous month, so that was a positive sign. We'll report on all of that in April, and those items that you'd like to revisit, we certainly revisit and make a final determination heading into 10-11.
Very good. Any other discussions, questions? Next.
Done.
Done?
Are we done? That's
I
it?
think I'm done.
We're done.
I
Very
think
good.
on behalf of Corey and Pat, thank you all for staying so late to accommodate us.
No
We
problem.
got through with most of Public Works, so.
Very good. Thank you for all your hard work and working with the numbers and trying to get it all to make, you know, to get it to happen and still provide quality service for our town, so. I'd ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Alderman Brown, Alderman Kennedy, all in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? We're adjourned.